The moment someone levels an accusation at you, something inside catches fire. Your chest constricts. Your thoughts scramble for evidence, justifications, anything to prove you're not what they claim. And in that split second, you've already been defeated. You stepped directly into the snare. You surrendered your power. You made yourself the accused in a court you never consented to enter. And the cruelest part, nobody remembers your defense. They only recall that you were accused. Every single day, the people around you are squeezing that trigger. And every single day you're dancing to their beat without even knowing it. But that changes now. Today I'm giving you a weapon that Machiavelli himself would have respected. A power move so devastating, so precisely calculated that once you internalize it, no person on earth will ever put you on trial again. Why defense is surrender in disguise. Let me tell you something that will cut before it heals. Every time you defend yourself, you aren't proving your innocence. You're confirming your vulnerability. Really think about that. When a king faces accusation from a peasant, does he summon witnesses? Does he draft letters explaining his position? No. He looks through that peasant as though the words never reached his ears. And that silence, that unnerving, unbothered stillness is exactly what keeps the crown on his head. Machiavelli understood this 5 centuries ago. He wrote that a prince who explains himself to every critic will spend his entire reign explaining and never ruling. Defense isn't strength. Defense is submission dressed in the costume of courage. The instant your mouth opens to say, "That's not true," or, "Let me explain," you've announced to everyone present that this accusation has power over you, that it reached something deep in your chest and made you flinch. And in the arena of power, a flinch is fatal. People don't remember logic. They remember energy. They remember who appeared shaken and who appeared unshakable. You could deliver the most brilliant airtight defense ever spoken, and it would mean nothing because the image of you standing there justifying your existence has already seared itself into their minds. You looked like someone on trial. You looked like the accused. And no amount of words will ever erase that picture. This is the first truth you must carve into your consciousness with a blade. Defense is not a strategy. It is capitulation wearing polished language. The powerful do not defend. They do not explain. They move in silence and let the results of their existence speak with a volume no accusation can ever match. The psychology behind the attack. Now let me pull back the veil and show you what's actually happening when someone comes at you. Because once you see the mechanics behind the manipulation, you'll never fall for it again. When a person accuses you, criticizes you, or provokes you in front of others, they aren't seeking truth. They already know the truth. What they're hunting for is your reaction. That's the treasure. Your anger, your frustration, your desperate need to set the record straight. That's what they came to harvest. It's a psychological extraction. Dark psychology teaches us that provocateurs operate on one principle alone: whoever reacts first loses control. They drop the bait into the water not because they're hungry, but because they want to watch you thrash. They want the room to witness you flail. The accusation was never the weapon. Your response was the weapon. And they handed it to you knowing you'd use it against yourself. This is how manipulators have operated since the dawn of human civilization. They don't need to defeat you physically. They don't need to outthink you intellectually. All they need is for you to feel something so intensely that you abandon your composure. Because the moment your composure fractures, you're no longer the person in control. You're the person who lost their frame. Machiavelli warned that your enemies will always try to drag you into their arena, because in their arena, their rules apply. The attacker chooses the battlefield when they launch the accusation, and every single time you defend yourself, you're confirming that you accepted their invitation. You showed up to their court. You played their game. And in their game you were always designed to lose. The Machiavellian power move: strategic silence. So if defense is surrender, what is the power move? What do you do when someone hurls fire at your name and waits for you to ignite? You do the one thing they never anticipated. You give them nothing. Absolute cold, devastating silence. Not the silence of a man who has no response. Not the silence of a man who is frightened. The silence of a man who has weighed the accusation, measured the accuser, and determined that neither deserves his energy. This is strategic silence, and it's the most fearsome weapon in the Machiavellian arsenal. When you go silent after an attack, something shifts in the room that you can almost feel physically. The accuser expected resistance. They rehearsed for your counterattack. Their entire strategy depended on you opening your mouth. And when you don't, their plan collapses in real time. Suddenly, they're the ones exposed. They're standing in the middle of the room holding a match, and there's nothing to burn. The crowd doesn't look at you with suspicion. They look at you with fascination because silence communicates something words never can. It says, I am above this. It says, this accusation is so far beneath me that acknowledging it would insult my own intelligence. Dark psychology confirms that silence triggers deep unease in the attacker, because human beings are wired to expect a response. When that response never arrives, the brain panics. It fills the void with doubt, insecurity, and fear. Your silence becomes a mirror. And in that mirror, the accuser sees their own smallness reflected back at them. Machiavelli didn't preach silence because it was virtuous. He preached it because it was lethal. The man who masters silence doesn't avoid conflict. He controls it without ever entering it. Reframe. Don't react. Now I need you to understand something. Silence is your shield, but it isn't your only weapon. There are moments when the game demands that you speak. And when those moments come, you don't defend, you reframe. Reframing is the art of taking the accusation, turning it in your hands, and throwing it back so cleanly that the attacker suddenly finds themselves on trial. Someone calls you cold and calculating. You don't say, no, I'm not. You look at them with steady eyes and say, it's fascinating that my discipline makes you uncomfortable. That's a reframe. You didn't defend your character. You exposed theirs. You shifted the spotlight without raising your voice, without breaking composure, without giving them a single grain of emotional satisfaction. This is Machiavellian warfare at its peak. The prince doesn't answer the accusation. He questions the motive behind it. Dark psychology teaches that every attack carries a hidden intention beneath the surface. And when you drag that intention into the light, the attacker loses all power instantly. They were operating in shadows and you just turned on the lights. Reframing requires something most men don't possess: the ability to pause before responding. That pause is everything. In that 1 second of stillness between the attack and your answer, your entire future is decided. React emotionally and you become the fool in someone else's story. Reframe strategically and you become the author of the narrative. The room doesn't follow the loudest voice. It follows the most controlled one. The man who can absorb an insult, pause, and redirect the entire conversation without a trace of anger in his voice is the most dangerous person anyone will ever meet. He doesn't fight fires. He decides which fires are worth lighting. The 48 Laws connection: make others come to you. Robert Greene wrote a law that most people read but few ever truly absorb: always make the other person come to you. Use bait if necessary. This law isn't just about negotiation or business. It's about every single interaction where power is at stake. When someone attacks you, they're trying to pull you into their territory. They want you chasing, explaining, reacting, running after their approval like a dog chasing a car. It will never catch. And the moment you chase, you've announced to the world that they're the one with value, and you're the one begging to be understood. Now flip that. Imagine a man who is accused and instead of defending, instead of reacting, he simply continues building. He says nothing. He changes nothing. He doesn't look back. What happens next is pure dark psychology. The accuser becomes obsessed. The silence eats at them. They start wondering why their attack had no effect. They throw more accusations, louder this time, more desperate, and still they're met with a wall of cold indifference. Eventually, they come to you. They always come to you. Because a man who cannot be moved becomes a mystery. And human beings are psychologically incapable of ignoring a mystery. Machiavelli understood that power isn't about force. It's about gravity. The sun doesn't chase the planets. The planets orbit the sun because its mass demands it. When you stop defending, stop explaining, stop reacting, you become the center of gravity in every room you enter. People begin orbiting you, not because you demanded it, but because your stillness created a pull their minds couldn't resist. Let them attack. Let them scream into the void. The void doesn't answer. The void doesn't care, and that's exactly why the void wins every single time. Emotional detachment, the ultimate armor. Let me tell you the truth nobody wants to hear. Your emotions are the most exploitable thing about you. Every person who has ever manipulated you, controlled you, or made you feel small didn't do it with strength. They did it by accessing your emotions. They found the wire connected to your need for approval, your fear of being misunderstood, your desperate hunger to be seen as good, and they pulled it whenever they wanted to watch you unravel. This is why emotional detachment isn't cruelty. It's survival. The Stoics understood this thousands of years ago. Marcus Aurelius ruled an entire empire while surrounded by betrayal, conspiracy, and constant attack. He didn't survive because he fought every battle. He survived because he chose which battles deserved his energy and let everything else dissolve into irrelevance. That's the armor you need to build. Not a wall of anger, not a shield of arrogance, but a calm, immovable awareness that what other people say about you is their business, not yours. Dark psychology reveals that manipulators test you before they target you. They throw small provocations first, a subtle insult, a passive-aggressive comment, a backhanded compliment, and they watch. They're studying your wiring. If you react to the small test, they know you'll collapse under the real attack. But if you absorb it like stone absorbs rain, they mark you as untouchable and move on to easier prey. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you feel nothing. It means you're no longer controlled by what you feel. There's a beast inside every man. The weak man lets the beast run free and calls it passion. The dangerous man keeps the beast on a chain and only releases it when the moment demands destruction. Train yourself to feel everything and react to nothing. That isn't coldness. That's supreme, calculated Machiavellian control. Read the room, not the words. Here's where most men fail and where you're going to separate yourself from every average mind in the vicinity. Most people listen to words. They hear an accusation and respond to the accusation. They hear a compliment and accept the compliment. They take everything at face value like children reading a book's cover and believing they understand the entire story. But you're not going to operate like that anymore. From this moment forward, you're going to read motive, not language. When someone criticizes you in front of a group, the words they use are irrelevant. What matters is why they chose this moment, why they chose this audience, and what they're trying to gain by putting you beneath them. Dark psychology teaches that every human interaction is a transaction. Nobody speaks without a purpose. The colleague who questions your competence in a meeting isn't confused about your abilities. They're positioning themselves above you in the social hierarchy. The friend who brings up your past failure during a celebration isn't reminiscing. They're threatened by your success and using memory as a weapon to shrink you back down to a size that makes them comfortable. Machiavelli wrote that a wise prince studies the intentions of men more carefully than their declarations. Declarations are performances. Intentions are the script behind the curtain. When you train your mind to see the invisible architecture behind every conversation, you stop reacting to the surface and start operating on a level most people don't even know exists. You become the man who sees the chessboard while everyone else sees checkers. You stop hearing noise and start decoding strategy. That's not paranoia. That's intelligence refined to its most dangerous form. The man who reads the room never gets ambushed because he saw the attack 3 moves before it was ever launched. Build a reputation that speaks before you do. There's a level of power where you no longer need to silence your critics because your reputation does it for you. Machiavelli considered reputation to be the most valuable currency a man could possess. More powerful than wealth, more dangerous than any army. More persuasive than the most eloquent speech ever delivered. When your name enters a room before your body does, and that name carries weight, the game changes entirely. Nobody accuses a man whose track record makes the accusation sound ridiculous before it even leaves the accuser's mouth. Think about that deeply. If someone calls a proven warrior a coward, the room doesn't turn to the warrior for a defense. The room turns to the accuser with suspicion, because the claim contradicts everything they've already witnessed. That's the fortress you must build. Not with words, not with arguments, but with undeniable results stacked so high that any accusation thrown at you looks absurd standing next to them. Dark psychology confirms that human beings judge credibility through pattern recognition. If every pattern associated with your name signals discipline, competence, and strength, then a single accusation doesn't just fail. It destroys the person who made it. Their attack becomes their own humiliation, because the audience already has a mental file on you, and nothing in that file supports the claim. This is why Machiavelli insisted that a prince guard his reputation more fiercely than his borders. Borders can be rebuilt. Armies can be reassembled. But a reputation once shattered takes a lifetime to restore. So stop wasting your energy arguing with people who contribute nothing to your legacy. Pour that energy into becoming so undeniably excellent that your existence becomes the only argument you'll ever need. Build a name that echoes when you're silent. Build a record that defends you while you sleep. That's not ambition. That's Machiavellian architecture at its highest form. The long game patience as a power weapon. Every impulsive man is a defeated man waiting for the moment to arrive. That's not poetry. That's a law of power written in the blood of every king who fell because he couldn't wait. Patience isn't passive. Patience is the most aggressive form of strategy that exists because it requires you to see the finish line while everyone around you is sprinting toward the wrong destination. Machiavelli studied rulers who conquered empires not through speed but through timing. They watched their enemies exhaust themselves. They let alliances crumble on their own. They waited until the perfect fracture appeared, and only then did they move swiftly, decisively, and without mercy. That's the long game. And the long game is where real power lies. Dark psychology reveals something fascinating about impulsive reactions. When you respond immediately to an attack, your brain is operating from its most primitive region, the part designed for survival, not strategy. You're functioning on adrenaline, not intelligence. And every word you speak in that state is a liability dressed as courage. But the man who absorbs the attack files it away, and waits for the right moment to respond, or the right moment to do nothing at all, is operating from the highest level of cognitive warfare. He isn't ignoring the offense. He's investing it. He's letting time do what arguments never could. Because time reveals everything. Time exposes liars. Time humiliates the reckless. Time vindicates the man who had the discipline to hold his tongue when every nerve in his body screamed for him to strike. The Stoics called this the discipline of delay. Machiavelli called it strategic patience. I call it the difference between a man who wins a battle and a man who wins the entire war. Stop reacting to moments. Start engineering outcomes. The patient man doesn't play the game faster. He plays it longer. And the man who plays longest always collects everything in the end. Become untouchable. You've now walked through the fire that most men spend their entire lives running from. You understand what they don't. Defense is surrender, silence is dominance. Reframing is warfare, emotional detachment is armor. Reading the room is intelligence. Reputation is a fortress. And patience is the deadliest weapon a man can carry without anyone knowing it exists. But let me give you the final piece. The piece that seals everything together and makes you untouchable. You must commit. Not tomorrow. Not when conditions are perfect. Now. Because knowledge without execution is just entertainment, and you didn't come here to be entertained. You came here to be transformed. From this moment forward, you're not the man who explains himself to people who are never going to understand. You're not the man who shrinks to make others comfortable. You're not the man who chases approval from mouths that have never spoken his name with respect. That man is dead. Bury him tonight. The man who replaces him doesn't argue. He observes. He doesn't react. He calculates. He doesn't beg for validation. He builds a life so powerful that validation comes crawling to his door uninvited. Machiavelli wrote for princes, but the principles belong to any man with the discipline to wield them. Dark psychology isn't about manipulation. It's about awareness. Seeing the game that everyone is playing and choosing your moves with precision instead of emotion. Stoicism isn't about suppressing your fire. It's about directing that fire with surgical accuracy so that nothing burns except what you intended to destroy. You're now the man who walks into a room and changes its temperature without saying a single word. You're the man who cannot be baited, cannot be rattled, and cannot be reduced by the opinions of those who've never built anything worth defending. You are untouchable. Now I want you to prove it. Drop a comment right now with the words, "I am the silence they cannot break." And let that be your declaration to the world that the old version of you no longer exists. If this monologue ignited something inside your chest that you've never felt before, hit that like button and let the algorithm know this message deserves to spread. Subscribe and turn on notifications so that every time we release a new weapon for your mind, you're the first to receive it. The war for your power has already begun. Now go and make them remember your silence louder than they ever remembered their noise.